Ross Taylor couldn't see at night or when the clouds were in. Eventually, he had to see an eye specialist who would fix his eyesight. In the 2 years before the change, he still averaged more than 50 in international cricket. The top level of batting talent can basically see in the dark. That is who we are talking about in our new book, The Art of Batting. Head over and order your copy today. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. If you want to be part of the community that makes content like this, head over now. Welcome to Good Areas Live. Jarrod Kimber here for a Wagon Wheel podcast, the podcast where we answer your questions on cricket if you have deemed to ask them. This particular show is powered by Patreon. I mean, most of our stuff is powered by Patreon, but this one is like more powered. It's like hyper powered by Patreon. But if you want to ask a question, you can also do it via a super chat. But the Patreons are the ones who actually make this whole thing happen, and they send their questions in earlier. So head over to Good Areas Patreon, and you can find us over there. Like Karan has, who says BCCI announced Gill as ODI captain while Rhodes, Sharma and Virat are named in the squad. One of the discussion topics amongst fans is emotional based on farewell is considered important in Indian culture, but the whole situation begs the question, how does a sportsman retire gracefully? So I don't think there's an answer to this. And one of the reasons I don't think there is an answer to this is, have you ever heard the thing of where players say, we know the time is right? And some of those same players come back from retirement or tell you years later that they were wrong. So there's no answer of how to retire. There's no answer on how teams should handle it. I think there are some teams that are quite right to probably think about this from a perspective of, what's the best way to put it? I think some teams are quite right to think of it from what is best for our team at this point. That's probably not the case with India 100% at the moment. And then you have a situation where other cricketers have, gone in a different direction with it. So there's no answer to this. It's just a sport. If you're an athlete, you just have to decide when you've had enough, right? And some of them don't, and they, like Alistair Cook, kept playing on. Jimmy Anderson is still playing on. So you would have to argue that neither of them retired gracefully. They're still around, still hanging, still trying to get runs, still trying to take wickets. But that's fine. You're a long time retired. So some people get it right just through sheer luck. Some people get it wrong and it's fine. Some people get it wrong and it's terrible, and the opposite. Like, that's just how these things go. There is no right answer to this and life, really. Rob says, what are your thoughts on Jonty Rhodes? Superb fielder, but a test and ODI average of 35, a test strike rate of 45 and 18 ODIs. So was he picked as a fielder who could bat? I think if you average 35 with a strike rate of 80, and I don't know, Varun's not on the chat. I'd have to bring up all of his numbers. But I would have thought those are pretty good numbers. You add in the fielding, and that's a very, very good player. But strike rate of 80 in his era, when would he have last played? Early 2000s? Maybe a little bit later than that. Was he still around? He's playing in Masters now, isn't he? Yeah, 2003. I would have thought a strike rate of 80 in that period is pretty handy. Lower order player. He's kind of like a first innings version of like Chris Harris or Michael Bevan, right? Test cricketer, I always did think he struggled a little bit more. I thought they could find a better batter than him in that era. He didn't have the ability to convert his, I don't think, wait, I've got in front of me, 300s and 1750s. I didn't think it was that bad. That's quite bad. And I always felt that with him, even when he was in, he was giving you a chance because he was a little bit limited. But I didn't feel that the same in one-day cricket. I thought he did a fine job in one-day cricket. But yeah, in test cricket, maybe they wanted him there with the field. I thought they were always about, compared to Australia, they always felt like a 1.5 batters short. And I think some of that is because of the all-rounder stuff, right? Where they were like hoping that all these all-rounders would sort of make up one unit. Whereas actually Australia went the complete other way and didn't have any all-rounders, which meant that if you include Gilchrist, they have like 7 frontline batters in their side. And if you go back to some of those South African sides, you have guys probably averaging low 40s, high 30s, mid 30s. What Hansi would have been about the same. Just having a look here. Hansi Cronje would have been about the same average, I would have thought. 35, 37? 36.4. Okay. I'll give myself that one. So they've got two guys who play a lot of test matches, both of which have a second skill. And that was obviously a big part of South African cricket at that time, was second skill. But as I've said a lot, that when you're averaging 35, 36, there's a big difference between, some of those Australian batters who were averaging 40, 45, 50, 55, right? There's a big jump up. And outside of Callis, out of, later in that year, probably only Callis in that period, and Cullinan, who didn't make any runs against Australia, they just didn't have that. So I don't think the issue was Jonty. I think the issue was that there was a couple of guys in that side who were probably a little bit limited and made him look worse in Test cricket. But in one-day cricket, I think he's up. That feels to me like a really good record in one-day cricket, especially for someone who probably batted 5. Sashimi says, would you rather face Ashwin Jadeja on an Indian pitch or Bumrah on an Indian pitch? Basically, is Bumrah the best bowler in Indian conditions ever ahead of Ashwin and Jadeja, if you take away the longevity argument? Well, I'd rather face the spinners because I'm much less likely to be hurt, and I'd see the ball. I'm not sure I'd last long against Ashwin or Jadeja, but I feel at least I'd see the ball coming towards me. I suppose it just depends on what kind of player I am as well. Maybe what kind of wicket. Is the ball reversing a little bit at that stage and everything else? Am I a left-hander? All these different things. Is there rough? Because I think if it's the end of the game, you would rather face Bumrah than Ashwin or Jadeja. If it's earlier on in the game and you're a right-hander, you'd probably rather face Ashwin or Jadeja. If it's... Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm trying to think. Yeah, at the end of the game, you certainly wouldn't want to face him. But in the middle, you might want to face him a little bit more. But if I'm a left-hander, I never want to face Ashwin, right? So, I mean, that's probably just depending on how you look at all those things. The one thing I would say is I feel like just because of the length of the spells, I can probably see Bumrah off. I don't think I can see Ashwin off, right? Or Jadeja off. They're just going to keep bowling. Rhodes says, if the West Indies always had all players available for all major ODI, ICC tournaments and most of the ODI bilaterals, how good ODIs would they have been between 2009 and 2019? All their T20 superstars available and Lara, Sawan, Chandrapal. Yeah, I think the biggest problem is still going to be their bowling. I don't think they had a particularly strong bowling lineup in one-day cricket at that point. And I think especially if you look at the sort of the Lara, Chandrapal, Sawan era, I know you're saying they could have played longer as well. But if you look at that era, they had quite a poor bowling lineup. And their best bowlers, guys like Gabriel, Roach, missing someone else as well that I meant to say, are not really good white ball bowlers. So you're still ending up with, what, Rampal, Alzari Joseph. Sunil Narine would play a lot of one-day cricket, which would be a huge boom. Andre Russell would help a little bit with the bowling, but you'd have to limit his bowling load, probably. So I don't think they suddenly go from, like, a team that almost didn't qualify and didn't, a non-qualifying team or a fringe qualifying team to a World Cup winning team. I think they're better, obviously. A combination of sort of Pollard, Hetmeyer, Russell, Gale, Narine with some of the other players that you've mentioned. And not to mention guys like Jason Holder, who did play a little bit more, and, Shai Hope would have played in that period. They had other players, but yeah, I don't think they suddenly become like a great side off the back of that. Oh. Aravind said, I remember watching Kiran Navgir play a few years ago. It was in awe of the amount of power that she had when she stood out, particularly in women's cricket, where that kind of power was rare. Quickly became apparent that despite her power, she was quite a limited player in many other ways. Is there hope for a player like her to develop to a point where she could still be useful? In my head, she feels like Tim David. Yeah, I think I'm trying to remember what her age is, but with players like that, if you have a, whatever you would put it, an elite skill set, right? Then the next thing is really, she's already 31 though. The next thing really is working out how to use it. We've seen players in the men's game. I think of someone like Anton Devcic, Tim David might be another one actually. Darren Sammy, to a certain extent, especially when it comes to his T20 batting, because they had that power, when they were able to kind of find a way to let it work for them, they went on to make runs later on in their career. Might be a little bit tougher for someone like her. because I don't know what the opportunities are and everything else. But yeah, I kind of think with players like that skill set, she shouldn't get any weaker, if that makes sense. She should still be very strong. Manan says, thoughts on LeBron and his age-defying longevity. Is he the Sachin of basketball? Similar Peake with very few, if any, flaws. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I think in basketball, I've been doing a big podcast series at the moment on the best peaks, and I don't know where they're going to come out. Best peaks since 2000, and I don't know who's going to come out at 1 or number 2 or number 3, but I think it's Curry, Shaq, and LeBron are the 3 that have not been ranked yet, unless I've missed a podcast. And he doesn't have the kind of peak that, and it's very possible he won't come out at number 1, LeBron. And you can make that argument at various times with Sachin and Ponting, right? Or Callis, even Kumar, perhaps, at times, where they might have had better peaks. Kohli's had a great peak compared to Sachin as well. But Sachin's is the longevity is just a marvel that you can be that good when you're that young and that good when you're that old. And LeBron is the same. The big difference with them is that LeBron is a person who I think continues to develop. So he's a physical genius with some good understanding of basketball. And then the longer he plays, the better he sees the court, the better he can pass and also learns to shoot. I'm not sure that Sachin actually upskills all that much. He's just, if anything, I think his best batting is probably in the 90s. And then in the 2000s, he's really good. But I don't know if we see any of that kind of Yunus Khan old man batting, right? Like, I'm trying to think of another player who's like that. A Green Gooch, right? Where you just like, oh, wow, they've worked it out. Late career Kumar Sangakkara, and he made all those hundreds in a row. So I think there's an element of that in LeBron. Whereas if you look at Sachin's career, it's probably more Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the one that you want to look at. He was really good when he was young, and he was really good at when he was old. And he basically played a similar method all the way through because he was so much better than most players. Sam says, what attributes make a bowler good at bowling at the tail? And to what extent are teams considering this when selecting the bowling lineup? It's happening a little bit more. I should say that it's a tough one in first-class cricket sometimes because a lot of people are very good against the tail in first-class cricket because the tail's even worse, right? So there is a bit of an element of that sometimes. The guys who bowl outside off stump and are trying to nick you off are generally not great bowlers against the tail. Some of them are okay. I think McGrath's a perfect example of someone who was okay. But also, he did have a good Yorker, so maybe that was part of it, and a good short ball. But generally, those guys who bowl just outside the off stump over and over again are not particularly good at bowling against the tail. And also, guys who bowl one length over and over again can struggle against the tail, unless it's a length that challenges the tail. So I think Harmy was someone who had a good record against the tail because he's bowling at, 145 Ks from a huge height, and it's jagging up at their body on his normal length. If you're a tail ender, I don't really know how you play that. Shoaib Akhtar was great against the tail because of the Yorker and the extra pace. So it's usually those sort of extreme outlier bowlers. I think Stuart McGill was another one that was great against the tail. So a lot of wrist spinners have that. Whereas finger spinners quite often struggle against the tail, and sort of conventional nick-off bowlers do. So you're looking for someone who can change their length to keep the stumps in play, or has a natural length or a natural speed or a natural skill that bothers tail enders. And, anything like that. Quite often they'll say with tail enders that, off spin and right arm seam, they're not too bad against, just because that's what they've played against the most. But if you give them a left arm bowler, right, or you give them anything with a bit of mystery or a little bit of extra pace, that's often where they struggle. So those are the sort of things you're looking for. I don't know if we have great numbers. Varun might know this, but someone sent me some analysis of this on Instagram recently, and I've got it saved on my computer, but I haven't had a chance to really go through it properly at the moment. But it's interesting going through, you can see patterns. And so maybe from that analysis, I can have a look at it for the book as well. Sino says, the recently concluded test match in Ahmedabad had virtually no crowd. It reminded me of Kohli's statement in 2018 that India should have 5 dedicated test venues and the other stated it should just be ODIs and T20s. What are your thoughts on this, and which 5 to 7 venues would you pick as the main centres? Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think too much in international cricket, you are given a game because you have spent a lot of money on your stadium rather than the fact that you can bring a crowd in. I think there are lots of venues in different countries in the world that probably could rock a test match, and they don't get test matches because their facilities aren't brand new or they're not going to get enough people coming in. So I'm not sure about the whole 5 to 7 dedicated test centers. I think that if I'm running cricket correctly, and this won't happen obviously, but if I'm running cricket correctly, I'd probably look at that Ahmedabad thing and be like, well, you don't get another test next year, right? And that's how these things should be done. And sadly, it's not really how our sport doesn't really work in that way. Josh says the Black Caps have lost. The Black Caps have a lot of T20s to work out their team to the T20 World Cup. The batting is a much bigger problem for another day, but the bowling actually reasonable if New Zealand used its best possible lineup. Bolt, Henry, Ferguson, Santner, Bracewell, with Neesham, Phillips, and Ratchin. Yeah, I suppose there's a lot of that. If you have Bolt and Henry, and Ferguson is at full skill, or full fitness, his skills are fine. And Santner and Bracewell can go together with a little bit of Phillips and Ratchin. You probably would prefer one of Santner or Bracewell to be a wrist spinner. Nothing's perfect. What else do you need from that? Yeah, maybe you want one of Bolt or Henry to be a better death bowler. I haven't looked at Henry's recent numbers, so maybe he's doing better. But traditionally, I think he can have issues there. I don't think he's a bad death bowler, but I think he can have issues there. But it's a pretty good lineup. I don't think you'd have any issues with that. Seems okay to me, especially with the 2 part-time spinners. Lemon says, clip of Babar Azam hitting Dale Steyn for 4 fours in the over just came on my feed. I don't really have a question. I just want to say that's probably the best over of batting I've ever seen. I didn't follow cricket pre-2021, so I didn't really understand the hype around Babar, but I see it now. Yeah, and I think with someone like him, I think I might have seen those clips as well. I think with Babar, it was a combination of a few different things. I think him and Virat are very similar technically, but he doesn't quite have the aggressive sort of press that Virat can have. And so he has that combination of looking more technically correct than, Root, Williamson, and Smith, while also looking like he has more time than Virat. And I think so, just purely on aesthetics, when it's working, I don't think there's a player in the world who looks more on rails. I remember 2019 World Cup, I did a piece where I looked at what was the best shot of each player. So who had the best, I think I put Sky's shot in there. I think it was something about Dan Christian where I'd seen, he had that jumping cut. So I was trying to work out, all the players with different shots. And Pakistani fans were so upset that Babar wasn't in it. And I was like, but what is his signature shot? It's kind of, it's either the cover drive or it's just the fact that he plays all shots with ease, right? And I think, sometimes you see that, whereas, that's very different than maybe someone like Rohit Sharma. So yeah, he's very pretty. And technically correct, but as we've seen before, these things don't always work out perfectly. Any gossip on Oliver Peake? So Oliver Peake, I don't want to say I'm old, but I'm pretty sure. I'm just trying to have a look now. Yeah, I'm pretty sure someone told me about him I want to say a decade ago, but when someone in Melbourne told me about this young kid who was coming through the system at that stage, and everyone thought he was going to be really, really good. And I remember there's a guy from Sydney I was told about decades even earlier, Richie Cunningham. Was it Richie Cunningham? Richie. I think it was Richie Cunningham. That also sounds like a guy from Happy Days, so I might be getting confused there. But you get told about these names, and I reckon that I heard about Peake a long time ago. But it might just be that I knew someone that knew him, or it was just a comment. I don't know a lot about him. I've seen a few clips of him so far. He looks interesting. Again, I think we've seen a few of these Australian players come through 18, 19, make a couple of innings, kind of get pushed and excited, and the drop off seems to be after that. My issue with Peake, based on the little bit I've seen of him, is I wonder if he's going to score too slowly at test level. There's a long way off. He may not make it to test level, but just because he's already scoring so slowly, although it's hard to tell because everyone in Victoria scores so slowly these days. I don't even know if that's his issue or just the issue of the situation. But exciting young player. I think he can bowl a bit, but I don't think I've seen him bowl. Left arm spin, maybe. I think it's spin. Cool. Aravind says, Watching Good during her opening spell in the match against Pakistan, I felt a lot of her deliveries were wobble seam. To what extent do you think the wobble scene is coming to women's cricket? Did it happen at the same time as men's cricket, or is it still predominantly swing-based skill? Because the women bowl slower and swing the ball further, they didn't go to wobble ball as quickly. There are definitely women who use it and definitely women who don't use it. But swing was so dominant in a way that it wasn't in men's cricket, that it was easier to do that. Kate Cross is the first one I know of who bowled it, but when she was tested, she actually went in to be taught the wobble ball, and they were like, actually, you're already bowling it, so let's not worry about it. So I don't know if you could even claim she was over there, but I did interview her about that. I want to say but I think it was around 2017, 2018 when the English women started being taught the wobble ball or started discussing the wobble ball. So I would say the rest of women's cricket would have been on about an 18-month delay beyond that. Well, actually, no. So when does the Australian men's team, 2019, 2021. So I would say that I didn't notice much outside of Kate, which is why I asked her about it, before about 2021, 2022. But I did see the odd in one for the England team, but I don't think the rest of the women came with it. So I'd say it was about 3 years behind the men's. But I think a lot of that is just, if you're swinging the ball sideways like some of them do, why would you bother with a wobble ball? Hurt says, what combination of pace and spin do you think India should play for the upcoming Australia ODI series? More importantly, will they keep Kuldeep? I don't know. I don't know what kind of wickets they're going to get, but based on the wickets we've had recently, you should probably have three and a half seamers in each side, minimum. I think that would be the way to go. I mean, I have no idea what kind of series that is. If you're asking the real question is you go out there with a bigger squad and then you work out what you want to do, because you're really trying to get yourself into position. Like, is it worth even losing some of those games just to get some miles into some people so they feel more confident before, World Cups and things? So I'm not too worried about the ideal lineup for bilateral games. In fact, I would say if a team's thinking about the ideal lineup for a bilateral game, they're kind of getting it wrong anyway at this point in the way that world cricket works. Ali says, I imagine even professional franchise cricket is not going to be immune to the politicization, despite the promises of professionalization by solely profit-seeking entities. For example, ongoing unofficial boycott of Pakistani players or anyone critical of BJP in all franchises run by the IPL owners. Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I mean, politics is undefeated, right? Eventually, these things work. I think when Mohammed Abbas, when he left Hampshire, I think we got a pretty good idea what was going to go. There are some owners who don't believe in that stuff as much. Should be said. There are some who just do it because it is politics. There are some who do it because they believe in it themselves. There's certainly, there's no doubt that there are issues at play there. I think I've been saying even before this latest skirmish that there are lots of reasons for the PCB just to make sure that the PSL is the second best league in the world, and this is one of it, right? Like, their players aren't going to be able to double dip the way that other players do. Gachi says, Women's World Cup, some of the matches are so slow, even with the boundary size being smaller. Is the pitch lack of talent combination? Is it a pitch or lack of talent combination? How can we increase interest in watching and playing women ODIs? I mean, there's never been more interest than there is now, Gachi. Questions like this I find really interesting, because I think if you were watching women's cricket 10 years ago, you'd be like, wow, I can't believe they can all throw the ball in brilliantly from the boundary. Wow, I can't believe how much ground they cover in the ring. There was a Pakistani point fielder the other day who missed a ball. And at first I was like, that's bad, she should have got there. And then I was thinking, when I first started covering Pakistani women's cricket, she wouldn't have even tried to field it. Like, how much Pakistan women's cricket has changed. It is slower than men's cricket. I don't know, one of the reasons I like women's cricket is a similar reason why I've always liked women's basketball, which is that there is a heightened sense of tactics, because you can't just blast through. You can't just use athleticism and power and pace, right? And so there's I remember watching Susie Bates. The way that she would captain a cricket field was just, she was so far ahead of any male captain in the world at that point, just by her ability to, because she she didn't have a great bowling attack, so she just had to keep making changes in the field and with the bowling attack and moving it around to put the batters off. I found that so much more interesting. It's a different game though. As I was saying to Robbie the other day, and I've done a video on it. Like, if you don't like left arm finger spin, it's probably not the tournament for you. But yeah, it is slow. I don't know. I mean, it's different. It allows you to settle more, and you know that when a 6 is hit, it actually means a little bit more. I don't know. You either like it or you don't, judge it. I'm not going to try and win people over. Everyone's allowed to have a preference. Average Joe says, in the India versus Sri Lanka Asia Cup match, there was a controversial super over moment. The batter missed the ball, tried to buy it, and was then run out. However, since the on-field over had given it out caught behind, the run out was disallowed, even though the bails were dislodged before the umpire raised his finger. When is the ball actually considered dead in such cases? Immediately after the mistaken catch, or only after the umpire's decision? Immediately after the mistaken catch is the answer, not after. It's got nothing to do with the umpire's decision. The umpire might give a decision 2 minutes later. But the ball is considered dead if the umpire thinks it's out. It might take them 20 seconds to give it out, but it's considered dead from the moment that it was out, as in that the actual dismissal happened. I'll be doing a video on this. I just haven't got around to it. I've been saying this for ages. It's just another case that basically what we have is a situation where the laws of cricket, as they were written, are perfectly reasonable and understandable, but they're not made for DRS. And I know the MCC are talking about this. My friend Fraser and I had a conversation about it recently. He is working towards fixing it, but I don't think the fix is easy. And I think that's the big issue that everyone has at the moment. Reese says, do you think this current England setup still holds imperial ideas around themselves and its relationship with cricket, even if they don't necessarily understand that themselves? Yes. I think that's probably fair. I've had conversations with people. I had a conversation. I was actually Colin Graves, the guy who worked for Colin Graves, not long after he started. And he said something that he thought was just a normal cricket thing. And I was talking to his lackey. And they were like, well, that's a perfectly reasonable thing to say. And I said, it is, if any other chairman of any other board says it. But when Colin Graves says it, what basically what it is we don't need to be involved with you. You need to be involved with us. We are still the center. And so I do think there is, you see it in the spirit of cricket discussion quite a bit with English. There is still an element of all that. I mean, there's an element of imperialism in so much. Like, I always find it really weird that the people who tell me that Britain is the best and it's a great country and everything else are like, why are all these foreigners coming over here? And I'm like, well, they're coming over partly because you think it's the best and you've been telling everyone it's the best, and also because you educated a lot of these people that it was the best. And I don't think the average English person really understands that, because it's not how colonialism, even now that colonialism is much more open and easy to understand than it maybe was a few years ago. Like, I don't think the average English person, when they hear Rule Britannia, understands what it might mean to someone from one of the colonies, right? Like, so again, as you said, it might not be explicit bias or anything else, but I do think there is a bias there. But everyone has a bias one way or another, right? Like, the reason why a lot of us don't like that bias is because it's deep-rooted. It's deep-rooted in our ethnicity, our national identity, and everything else. But everyone has something from their local area that's a bit shit, right? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to pretend like the England players are the only ones who might have weird beliefs. But my favorite ever bit of commentary in the history of sports is a guy called Bruce McAvaney in Australia, a famous Australian sports commentator. And there's I think it was like a Commonwealth Games or Olympics. I've written about it before, but I can't remember what it was. But there's one Australian guy in the front group, and there are 3, let's say Kenyans, but Ethiopians. It was like one of the good distance running things there. And the expert is sitting there going, it's going to be really hard for the Australian. These are incredible athletes, and sort of going on and on about how good these athletes are and how they're going to work as a team and why it's specifically going to be hard for the Australian. And Bruce McAvaney's like, yeah. But of course, they don't have Australian hearts. Kenyan hearts. Do you know what I mean? Everyone's got to hang up when it comes to that sort of stuff, whatever it may be. And, the same. There is an element of that sort of within English cricket, but I think there's that element within kind of every country that I've ever come across in cricket has some kind of weird hang up or thing that they hold on to, which I suppose if you spent 5 minutes thinking about, you'd be like, is that right? That's probably not right. This video is brought to you by our supporters on Patreon. If you want to be part of the community that makes content like this, head over now. Ben Duckett does not leave the ball. He goes after everything. That is his signature style. Well, actually, no. Perhaps now he is best known for Duckett's Buckets, his new hat range. I don't know if Herbert Sutcliffe sold his own hats, but I would definitely have bought them if he did. But Ben Duckett does, so you don't need to be left alone without one. Chase down your own Duckett's Buckets today. Welcome back to the Wagon Wheel. PJ says, if cricket in Fiji really took off after the 1940s, 50s boom, could there have been an alternate history where a Pacific Islands team combined like the West Indies continued to play Test cricket? Granted, there are some massive distances between PNG, Fiji, Samoa, and Vanuatu. And I'll PayPal you $100 right now if you can pronounce Mr. Iambulla's name fully correctly on the first try. I don't think I can. I'm not sure. He could have. It's worth going and Googling Iambulla, the cricketer, if you want to have a go at that. Good one. Good drunk game with your friends. Yeah, I wonder if one of the things with the West Indies is that those islands are not that far apart and that there was actually a university structure already there. And, you know, and it's the same with Ireland's cricket team, which is North and South, or Republican North. Again, there was a rugby structure already there. So it's easier to do when there's already some kind of structure or links between the two. You know, if you look at the East Africa one in 1975 World Cup, that just sort of disappeared because I don't think there was any sort of structure. I don't think it was ever going to work. So I think this one would have struggled to work as well. But yeah, we probably missed out on all of those four places have had talented cricketers come through. So if they were all in the, you know, playing together, we might have had another strong team coming through. PJ says, domestic games in both South Africa and New Zealand haven't been scored live on Cricinfo in a couple of years. In fact, you won't even find live scores or updates on the CSA website. Yet Cricinfo was live scoring Hong Kong's 50 over club cricket competition. We get that Cricinfo shut the bed in the last 5 years. These are the words of PJ, not of a man who was probably still working with them 5 years ago. When was my last time at Cricinfo? 2021? I thought they were great when I was there. But what is the point of a full member nation trying to hide their professional matches? If a tree falls in the forest, comes to mind. Yeah, it's one of those things. I don't think teams actually understand how, or organizations understand how important these sorts of things are. If it's on TV, they should be able to do it, and they should be able to do it relatively cheap. I've been wondering about this a little bit. Is there a way to go back almost to the roots of Cricinfo and do a similar thing again with all the stuff that Cricinfo don't cover? Because there's so much cricket that Cricinfo can't cover, right? And there is, you know, who knows? They might have got sponsored to do the Hong Kong tournament for all I know, right? Or it might have just been there as an Indian team there and they thought it was worth doing. I don't know the reasons behind it. But I think there's a lot of stuff that could be ball by ball out there. You know, there are companies like Crex and Cricket Live Guru, whatever they're called. Again, you know, I think there's opportunities for those companies to sort of come in. Cricket board's probably it's just not sexy enough, PJ, would be my guess. Hertz says, I'm tired of all this captaincy drama, especially in the subcontinent. If the ICC hired you to design a written framework for a set of guidelines to make cricket captain free, what would it look like? You just put an earpiece in a senior player and, you know, you have a field quarterback sort of thing. And the coaches just pass all the messages on from off the field, which is what happens in American sport. Basketball and American football certainly kind of have that, don't they? So all the decisions are really made by the coaching staff as much as possible. I suppose that's what you do. I mean, it's, you know, That's the simplest thing. I wonder if we won't get to a point anyway where people off the field can talk more to people on the field. It's an interesting quirk that we've managed to keep it away. Cam says, who would you say is the best player to come from Canberra? Michael Bevan, Brad Haddon, Jason Berendorf, or someone else? Is Michael Bevan from Canberra? Now I've got to find where he was born. Okay, yeah, Belconnen. I couldn't remember. The best player, I mean, it's probably Bevan, isn't it? I don't think you'd have Haddon in that. I think Haddon's not as good a cricketer, and Berendorf isn't quite there. Who's the third cricketer? A fourth cricketer, because Lyon doesn't count, right? Because he's not born there. I can't think of anyone else. They had some good cricketers like in previous eras, didn't they? But obviously, we didn't really get to see them, and a lot of them didn't translate to top-level cricket. So let's go with Bevan. He's the best cricketer of the ones that you've mentioned anyway. Ajit says, why is there no standard one-size-fits-all kind of rule when it comes to ground size? Is it cricket? It's ridiculous how tiny some international grounds are. You don't see this in other sports, as far as I know, at least not to this extent. You actually do see it in other sports, but the shape of cricket makes it a little bit more obvious. But yeah, I think you do actually see in some other sports, isn't it? Isn't it? Not all football fields are exactly the same. Is that right? I'm now going to footballpitches.com. I thought, and maybe it wasn't football I was thinking of. Oh, yeah, here we go. So, the city ground in Nottingham Forest is 105 metres long. And in Wolverhampton and Craven Cottage, it's 100 metres long. And that ground is 71 metres wide. And Craven Cottage is 65 and 64. So yeah, I think there's other sports as well that, again, you would think would be uniform, but are not. The main reason is England, Ajit. Right? Let's be honest. It's to do with the fact that England did not have a lot of room in their cities. They built to what room they had available and what shapes they had available. And so what are we going to do? Completely change all these old cricket grounds, and heritage listed in some cases, parts of the grounds to be able to do that. Once they didn't do it in England, why would anyone else do it? I kind of like it. Baseball stadiums is another one that's quite similar. So yeah, I don't think it's as rare as people I think it's one of those things, if you watch sports on TV, I think you believe that everything is the same. Whereas cricket, if you see Trent Bridge's, square leg boundary, you're like, wait a minute, that doesn't look right. So I think there's something to do with the angles and everything else makes it very different. But, Adelaide Oval is a very weird, like Adelaide Oval and the Oval are completely two different shapes, right? And I think that brings about different kinds of skill sets and everything else. So I'm okay with that. Rob says, which batter would you want to bowl for your life? Bowling average more than about 40 qualifier. Which bowler to bat for your life? Oh, okay. Batting average less than about 15 qualifier. I've got a bowling average of over 40 to bowl for my life. Trying to think of someone who is really good with a bowling average over 40. There's probably a couple of bowlers who just came in and bowled a couple of games and didn't take any wickets. What's Bob Simpson's bowling average? Because aren't you really asking who's the best part-time wicket taker? If that's the question you're going for there. I reckon Bob Simpson's just over 40, 41, 42. I go Bob Simpson. Leg spin, decent. I was thinking Dennis Compton as well. Or any other wrist spinners that are kind of... I'm trying to think, was there a Pakistani wrist spinner as well, maybe, in a flat batting era? But yeah, bowling average more than 40. And which bowler to bat for your life? Averaging under 15. Oh, that's probably, is that Hogarth or Gillespie? Some of the, you just want someone who's just going to block that, right? Sashimi says, I've been watching cricket. Does Gillespie still average under 15? He probably doesn't because he made 200 at the end. Oh, God. Is that right? Oh, he averaged 18. Pain in the butt. Yeah, Hogarth. I've been watching cricket since 2014, so this can't just be WTC points, but I don't recall a single instance of an Indian player ever being rested for a test series or even a match. But Bumrah doesn't count as that was injury prevention. Bumrah is playing these home tests versus the West Indies. He played a home test against Bangladesh last year and is rested for the Australia White Ball Tour. Even the big three rest players when they play White Ball series against each other. So why don't teams rest players for test matches? Teams do rest players for test matches, though. We've seen the rotation before. Australia did it. When did Australia start? At 2010? It certainly happened before. I think Mark Wood's been rested before. Mitchell Johnson's been rested before. Was Cummins or Hazelwood rested at one stage? So I think it's a little bit of that. Teams don't overuse their bowlers in the same way that they used to. So maybe they just feel that they're ready to go. I'm also not sure that the resting worked as well as it does for baseball pitches in that way. Players aren't actually used to being rested. So if you start getting rested when you're 27, 28, maybe that's the wrong way to go. But yeah, players have certainly been rested. But it's not... What did Australia had a name for it? And I used to make fun of that name so much. But yeah, it hasn't really stuck around as much. But teams have done it before. Rhodes says, how did South Africa become a Sri Lanka-like wicketkeeper-heavy side from traditionally seam bowling all-rounder heavy sides? Current 11 across formats, QDK, Rickleton, Stubbs, Breedsky. Yeah, I could go on. Yeah. Yeah, Klaasen, you should definitely have had. He is a keeper. I don't think this is a South African thing. I think this is a world cricket thing. It's very rare now to have an international side where you don't have two people who can wicket keep in it. Sometimes three, sometimes four. And one of the reasons is so many kids now, if they can bat, do a little bit of wicket keeping in their teenage years and have the skills to do it. If not, in the old days, you probably, if you were a really good bat, you wouldn't really be encouraged to wicket keep as well. Whereas now it's almost the opposite. So I just think it's a worldwide thing of, we've seen it with England, right? They had 4 wicket keepers in a side at one time. There are more wicket keepers. What's actually rare now is for someone to wicket keep in every single game, right? Josh says, I know that ODI is your least favorite format, but are you going to miss them at all? Surely there's still a world where you can appreciate a Fab Four style player scoring 90 runs for 80 balls as heroic, rather than match losing innings in T20s. I think a world with only tests and T20s is a little bit more boring. Yeah, I think I would miss them. I'm not going to be massively upset, but yeah, I've grown up with them, right? They've been a major part of my life. So I think if they disappear, I would miss them. I think I miss World Cups. I'm not sure I'd miss that much outside of World Cups. Even now, I struggle to watch bilateral ODIs unless I'm commentating on them. Watching WA versus New South Wales, William Salzman looks like a properly classy batter. Have you seen him play? No, I haven't. Now, someone sent me a message about him recently as well. But no, I don't know much about him at all. It does feel, after a couple of years of no one contacting me from Australia about young players coming through, that suddenly there's a few players now that people are like, oh, no, this guy, he can do a little bit of something. So be interesting to see. The other thing is I think he can bowl, can't he? So I'm just trying to bring up his numbers. Yeah, he's got some wickets. I think I might have seen him bowl more than bat. Anyway, but it's not sexy bowling, but it's something bowling. Ali says, do you think there'll be an IPL fatigue if it ever becomes a longer tournament? Unless it becomes a weekend-only tournament and internationals during the weekdays or vice versa. Yeah, there'll be fatigue. There's fatigue during Major League Baseball season and the NBA too. There has been a justification to bring the NBA down by 20 games for a long time. No one's done it because those extra 20 games pay a lot of money. The IPL will handle its fatigue. Reese says, lived in Kent my whole life, support the county. They've produced a lot of keepers down the years. Is there a specific reason you could think of, just sort of generational pass along knowledge? Is there a similar reputation for other counties, states, provinces? Now, you do get situations where, like, I think there's a reason why Western Australia and Queensland have tall bowlers, right? Because it makes sense to be a tall bowler in those locations. So, so you might have something like that, the same as you might get faster spinners in Chennai than you do in, I don't know, Bangalore, right? Like, I'm just making this up a little bit. You're more likely to get wrist spinners in Pakistan, right? Because the pitches are flatter and they don't help the finger spinners, whatever that may be. I can't think of any reason why Kent would have had a lot of keepers. I mean, you're right. I mean, off the top of my head, I can understand what you're saying. There is an element of, if you were lucky enough to have, I don't know, let's say 2 or 3 keepers who were all not only great keepers, but stuck around and helped the next generation become great keepers as well. Do you not create maybe a technical advantage? There's a great article, which I read years ago, about Finnish goalkeepers in the NHL. One of the best articles I've ever read about sport. And they basically just had a slightly different method and slightly different training and everything else, which essentially gave the Finnish goalkeepers this huge advantage. And over time, people just worked that out, and it wasn't as much of an advantage going ahead. But for a long time, because they were Finnish NHL players and they wasn't exactly like the best, the most famous players, they kind of just got away with doing what they did. And it was little things like they caught the ball more rather than patting it away. And the way they prepared beforehand was different. It was a fascinating article anyway. But so I do think there is an element of that. Cam says, I miss Jess Jonassen in the Australian women's team. I was thinking about this because I've obviously just written this big piece on how women's cricket is going more left-handed. It's incredible that a player who, like, I don't think Jess Jonassen's that old. A player as talented as her, who was probably punching at one stage to be the best player in the world, I would have thought at times. Certainly in the white ball games. She's 32, and yet she's not at this tournament. And a part of it is just because Australia has so much flexibility, and they have players who can do her job and everything else, and maybe people who can bat a little bit better than her, and whatever that may be, etc., etc. But like, she's got a one-day average of 19 at less than 4 runs and over, and she was a lockdown player. I think it'd be fascinating to talk to her and be like, you've gone from one of the best players in the world to not in the World Cup team. And she probably starts for every other team. Maybe not England, right? Just because of Eccleston. But she probably starts for almost every other team, right? Fascinating. And that is great for women's cricket. That a player that good is not at the World Cup. And also, this goes back to that conversation I was having a little while ago about everyone getting fascinated about Shreyas Iyer. The only reason we notice this is because there is a player that good not in the World Cup, which says a lot about the team. Ajit says, what might be the reason we see less of bowlers that can bat or batters that can bowl across all teams? Teams used to confidently take to the field with 7 bowling options. This is just because as cricket gets better and more professional, people become more specialists. That was always going to happen. If you go in junior cricket or club cricket, like every kid I ever talked to is an all-rounder. Like, I always find that really funny. But every kid I ever talked to is an all-rounder, right? And in associate cricket, you get lots of all-rounders. The higher the level you go up, the harder it is to do one skill, let alone 2, right? There's also a whole thing when it comes to throwdown. People have ruined part-time bowling a little bit. Now, in the old days, people didn't play. Even when I started doing analysis in 2018, if I tried to talk about, like, cricket boards actually make watching their games almost impossible now. I spend almost as much time trying to find where I can view it as I do actually following the action. That is why I use NordVPN. They let me find all the cricket I want to watch while protecting me from the nasty side of the internet. Nord will free your cricket matches. Grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/good areas to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months on top. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Watch every match with NordVPN. Hello, everyone. I don't know if the sound is working now. I thought it was at my end, but I think it's a StreamYard issue because the ad sounded even worse than I did. So it's not about the mic. It's something about StreamYard and everything else. So, yeah, I don't know what we're going to have to do. Let's play another ad and see what the issue is here. Sorry about that. Cricket boards actually make watching their games almost impossible. I spend almost as much time trying to find where I can view it as I do actually following the action. That is why I use NordVPN. They let me find all the cricket I want to watch while protecting me from the nasty side of the internet. Nord will free your cricket matches. Grab your exclusive NordVPN deal by going to nordvpn.com/good areas to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan plus 4 additional months on top. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. Watch every match with NordVPN. I have traveled the cricketing world, and so I've collected 2 things: the phone numbers of random taxi drivers and overseas SIM cards. Rideshare apps have fixed the first part, and Sally is doing the second. Now, all you need is their eSIM on whatever plan works for you. You activate it, and you can use it anywhere in the cricketing world. It helps you save money. It is a global solution to a global problem. Stop fiddling with tiny SIMs and get the one that does it all. Go to Sally.com good areas and use the code good areas to get an exclusive 15% off your first purchase. Fly free with Sally. I have a book out with Abhishek Mukherjee, and it is called Overthrowing Cricket's Empire. And it's about the stories of how each team beat England for the first time. We go all the way back to the demon Fred Spofforth getting annoyed at W.G. Grace for acting a little bit like Alex Carey. And then we come all the way to present times with Rashid Khan's England's redemption. We cover every single team to beat England in a major international, but we also talk about the incredible stories, like the barefoot basher from Fiji that almost played for New Zealand. In fact, this book is full of tales like that, like how Pakistan... Hello everyone, I don't know what's going on. I've got all sorts of interference coming through. There's something going on with the StreamYard. So apologies to everyone. But yeah, I answered Ajit's question anyway, and that's all of those. I'll just get to some super chats quickly, and then we can head off. Siddharth says, you often talk about Shibboleth's institutional knowledge being equally or more important than financial wealth. Do you think the West Indies have lost that wisdom? Oh, I don't think it's more important than financial wealth. I think it's very hard to be good at cricket in a period of time when you have just started it. So I had this conversation with this scientist years ago who told me that if China started playing cricket within 5 years, they'd be one of the best test teams. And I went, they just wouldn't. There's too many little things that they have to learn that they just wouldn't be able to learn in a 5-year period, no matter how much money they threw at, no matter how many great athletes they had. But over a period of time, you wouldn't do that. West Indies still have the institutional knowledge and the shibboleths and everything else. But so does most of the cricket teams they play against now, right? Like even the associate teams are starting to get that because they play so much. So I think the game is shifting around the West Indies. I don't think it's that they're getting worse. I mean, they're not getting better. They don't make any runs. Jack says, have a question for you. It's probably related to physics. Do spinners knock the stumps down more than pacers do when hitting the stumps? Knock the stumps down? No, generally the ball only comes out of the stump only comes out of its groove if someone's bowled quite quickly. It's very rare for us spinners to do that. I think that's what you mean, Jack. I love Mutton Biryana says, Monga on Rohit's exit. Kind of unsentimental call Australia did during their periods of dominance. Fair compromise. 3 format, IPL captaincy under Gill as about... I don't understand that bit. Yeah, I think me and Robbie talked about this before. Like, it's a good time to do it from a team perspective, and so you can understand why they would go about that and do that if that's the case, and that's what you should be doing, right? Like, I don't think the person should ever be above the team, really. Joel says, Aussies more obsessed with chuckers than other cultures. See us whining about anyone unconventional. Yeah, Joel, there's no doubt. And this goes, I think people are like, I've heard all sorts of stories about Australians being racist about chucking, whatever. The most moaning I've ever heard about chucking would be Brett Lee by Australians. And it's not even close. It was so much when he was playing. If he was bowling in any pub in Australia, someone was moaning about him. We had Jeff Foley, the Queensland spinner, Troy Cooley, the Australian quick. Yeah, so chucking is really, really on the minds of everyone. I remember just like playing club cricket, people would call people in games. So yeah, definitely. I have written about that before, Joel. I want to say it's in my book, Test Cricket, The History of Test Cricket. I actually talk about that as a phenomenon. Hassan says, since January 2024, Amir Jamil has a better batting performances in tests versus Babar Azam, 28 to 24. Okay, well, I mean, they should swap positions in the batting order then. We hear these sorts of things a lot, right? And like, I understand the sort of the idea of it, but like at any one time, you would kind of expect something like that is possible. Like if someone's struggling a little bit. But let's just have a look at Jamal's. He bats at 7, 8, 9, and 10. If you go back and have a look at me talking about the Indian top order struggling when Ashwin, Jadeja, and co kept helping them, I said the exact same thing. It's easier to bat down the order, especially in modern cricket with the wobble ball, and when the pitches are being juiced for spin, it's the bounce and pace of the hard ball that is the hardest to face on those. So it is never been harder to be a top order player anywhere in the top 4. That's why the best players are moving down to number 5. I'm pretty sure if Jamal and Bubba switched positions, Bubba would average more than him. But that's not the job, right? And he's got to make more runs. And yeah, he's not been good for a while. I've done some videos on it. There's technical reasons there. There's probably others as well. Sorry to everyone about the issue with the sound, but looks like we got it fixed at the end. We'll be back again for more podcasts very, very soon. This is Jarrod Kimber on the Wagon Wheel. Brian Lara used pot plants to work on his placement. John Wright glued his glove to his bat. Sachin Tendulkar dug up practice pitches. Tatenda Taibu cut the top off his bat. Claire Taylor used a hockey grip. Steve Smith was from tennis. Dean Jones would call phantom runs. And Victor Trumper turned the nets into a war zone to survive. The best batters in the world do whatever they have to make runs. We have told their stories in our new book, The Art of Batting.